Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Mirikitani with another episode of Weighing In, brought to you by USA Wrestling, the national governing body for wrestling in the United States, and by Nike Wrestling. Go to athleteps.com for all of your Nike and USA Wrestling branded gear. Mark Ostrander Grant Turner. Let's just start with the news. Gable's back. GT, you had privately talked to me about this offline. Mark's got some great reactions, but you're the guy. This is also known as GT season. Pretty much April to August is Grant season, which, Mark, bothers me that we used to at least own September to March, and then he thumped us in the fantasy contest. So he's like coming for all 12 months now. Like, you remember when he first joined the pod, Mark? He was really quiet and respectful and, like due diligence to our elders and all that stuff.
He's still respectful to a point, David. He really is.
It was disrespectful to kick our butts that bad. That was disrespectful.
The only disrespectful thing I've ever heard Grant say was when I mentioned maybe I'd look into the Oklahoma coaching job, and Grant started laughing. That was disrespectful. Grant?
I feel like that you could develop a staff that would help you with the technology pieces that of today's market.
Today's market, I see. Okay.
And by staff, he means a nurse with cortisone shots ready 24/7.
Yeah. The individual drills might be a tough spot there, Mark.
Yeah. All right, GT, Gable, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, so big release. Flo did a great job with kind of his, he's going to be at the U.S. Open. Basically, I don't know enough about the USA Wrestling history and or how this has been perceived, but we haven't had a lot of like reigning Olympic champions like retire and then come back. So this is a huge international tidal wave, if you will, meaning the entire world has been put on notice that the Olympic champion is coming back and making another run. It's like very similar, like kind of like a Lopez from Cuba, where like he doesn't wrestle for a few years and all of a sudden he comes back and just takes the spot and then goes and wins another Olympic gold medal. So I'm very excited to see Gable compete again. I'm very excited to see him at the U.S. Open. I feel like it's an amazing platform for him personally with his, WWE connections, all the things that he's doing socially, all of the different interests that he has. I think it's a really big platform for him. But once again, as a fan of wrestling and a USA Wrestling fan, having the reigning Olympic medalist come out of retirement to come back to the sport and compete again is a huge deal. And very excited to see that. Very excited to see Gable, who is still very much in his prime, come back and see what he wants. What he's got left in the basement to go compete again and win another Olympic title.
So before I jump to Mark, I probably say this 6 times a year. Moving from track to USA Wrestling allows you to have a different perspective. If something's on Rockfin, we can talk about it. If something's on track or flow, we can talk about it. But when something impacts USA Wrestling as positively as it does, it's nice to be on USA Wrestling's airwaves. And it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, like to use the University of Iowa, they rooted for Gable, gave him a standing ovation, what they thought was his duel there. So, but even, like Iowa and Minnesota in general are trying to beat each other's brains in. USA Wrestling's like sort of the unifying entity where the other loyalties get set aside. So this is awesome. Mark, I want your thoughts because you were so genuinely excited. And then I want to talk to both of you guys about eligibility question and a seating question. But go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, I felt like about a 9-year-old come Christmas morning, can't wait to see what you're getting. And then you find out it's the greatest gift that you've ever wanted, to watch Gable wrestle again. I was pretty excited when I found out he was going to do it because he is a talent. Grant, to your terms, he retired. He's coming out of retirement to see if he can get another one. I think you're correct in the point that he took a year and a half off and didn't wrestle. But the guy is, 23, 24 years old? to me, I'm retired. If I came out and did it, then that would be a shock. Right? But I can't wait to watch him perform again. I think he's still at his peak. I think he's just gotten stronger and quicker. I think he'll be a little rusty because he hasn't had the, on-mat competition. Being in a wrestling room as coaches, we all know it's a little bit different when the lights are on you, but he performs best when the lights are on. So, I thought it was like Christmas all over again when we found out he was going to come back and make another run.
So I'm excited like everybody else. I mean, I had COVID when the Olympics were on, but the John Smith play-by-play of Gable during the last 30 seconds of the match is it's either like amazing or terrible, depending on how you want to look at it. Like from a pure play-by-play standpoint, it's not what you're supposed to do. As someone who's ever coached a match and listening to Coach Smith just be so engrossed in it and so, rooting for somebody and, kind of coaching at a high level, but also just super basic, like get it, go get it. Like that was awesome. He's got to be the number one seed, right? Like, I mean, I've been in one of these coaches meetings. Like right now, Zilmer would be the one seed, right, Grant? Based on the fact that he was the returning world team member.
Yeah.
So then when they go in the coaches meeting, they're just going to ask Eggum which one's going to be seeded 1 or 2, right? I mean, like Gwiz has no criteria over Gable. So, I mean, Gable's either 1 or 2. And I think that who this impacts the most is the number 3 guy, which is probably Gwiz. Like, Gable's the monster. You want to just be on the other side of it. So the other thing is this. I went on Minnesota's website, so University of Minnesota Wrestling. So Gable 2018-19 wrestled straight through 1920, 2021, 21-22. One of those years is a COVID year, so it doesn't count. Does he have another year of eligibility, or did he redshirt prior to that? Do we know that? And would that matter? Like, GT, let's say he's got another year. Do you think there's any chance he comes back this fall to college?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that opportunity would have been this calendar year, but I think with circumstances, either with like finishing his degree option or not, going in, then basically having to go into grad school or taking some sort of courses while able to compete. I don't know what that status would have been, but I don't think that there would be an option for him to come back in the fall and wrestle for the U. It
does seem if Demetrius Romero was eligible this year, that somehow Gable should be eligible next year. And as somebody that did rankings for a long time with Mark, I can tell you that this stuff with COVID and figuring out who still got eligibility is super tricky. So the next thing, Gary Abbott was kind enough to call me, and this is my fault, guys. I did not correctly explain the qualifying procedure to make the world team in 2023. That's on me. That's not on Grant or Mark. That's 100% on me. I was partially right in the sense that in a weight class where we have a returning medalist, that medalist is sitting in Final X, and the winner of the U.S. Open becomes the person they wrestle. So here, I'm just going to read this verbatim. This is from Gary Abbott. This is the current list of athletes who've already qualified for the 2023 Senior World Team Trials Challenge Tournament. This was as of yesterday, April 12th. That tournament is set for May 20 and 21 at Discovery Canyon High School in Colorado Springs. With the changes to the qualifying procedures for Final X, the Senior World Team Trials Challenge Tournament will not include all 30 weight classes. In weight classes where a 2022 Senior World medalist has accepted his or her final position, he or her will wrestle against the 2023 U.S. Open champion at their weight class in Final X. So that part I did explain correctly. Those weights will not be included at the World Team Trial Tournament. In the weight classes where the USA did not win a 2022 Senior World medal, as well as any of the weight classes where a Senior World medalist declines their Final X position, i.e. Jaden Cox, the weight class will be contested at the Senior World Team Trials Challenge Tournament. In these weight classes, the 2023 U.S. Open champion will wrestle the winner of that tournament in Final X. Currently, we list the qualifiers at the 15 weight classes where the USA did not win a senior world medal, 10 Greco, 3 women, 2 men. The deadline for a 2022 senior world medalist to declare for Final X is April 21. If there are any weights where a 2022 world medalist declines their Final X berth, that weight class will be contested at the Senior World Team Trials. And this qualifier list will be updated at those weight classes. Currently, there are 82 athletes who've qualified to compete at the Senior World Team Trials. To review the selection process in each discipline, visit the team selection criteria page. This is at teamusa.org. Now, I clicked on that tab, and there's 3 different seating criteria. Men's, women's, and Greco each have their own criteria. And the criteria are several pages long, and some of it even includes stuff like you got to have a passport. But so we're not going to break all that down because we've got an hour. But you're going to give people one example. So at men's freestyle in 61 kilograms, our 2022 world team member was Seth Gross. He's already qualified for the World Team Trials Tournament. Our 2021 world team member, Dayton Fix, is already qualified. The highest U.S. medalist at the Bill Farrell in 22 is Nishan Garrett. He's qualified. The Senior Pan Am 2023, Senior Pan Am Championship medalist is TBD because that tournament hasn't happened yet. And that person may or may not medal. And then the top 7 from the U.S. Open go to the World Team Trials as well. And then there are non-world championship weights, which were the 2023 NCAA champions, which are Glory at 25 and Vito at 33. So a lot to unpack here. First of all, my sincere apologies for not getting this correct last week or the week before. That's my fault. Second of all, to go forward, if you look at this, like, for example, Mark, before we went on the air, you said, like, Dayton hasn't registered yet. He doesn't have to. That's correct. Like Seth Gross has, Vito has, Glory has. They don't have to. But if they win the U.S. Open, they get to skip the mini tournament or the World Team Trials tournament. So there is an incentive to do this. And that's one of the things they wanted to do. Like last year, there was no incentive to wrestle in the U.S. Open. Like if you'd already qualified for the next step, which was the Coralville tournament, right, GT? Like if you were already qualified for Coralville, there was no reason to go to the U.S. Open. Now there's a reason to go to the U.S. Open. And there's really a reason to go to the U.S. Open in like 8 of the 10 men's weight classes because you gotta go. Now, Jaden goes up to 97, so he's going to decline that spot. So 61, 92, and 125, which is basically 134, 202, I think, and 275 if you're doing pounds, are the 3 weight classes in men's, all 10 in Greco, and 3 in women's. So, Mark, thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I just want to go make sure I understand this. So, and I'm just going to use Gable as an example, David, because we talked about him earlier on the show. If Gable, this weight is not qualified for Final X position because they did not place at the Worlds last year, correct?
Zilmer did not medal, just to be very specific. So this is a weight class where the winner of the yes, there's no one sitting in Final X, correct?
So if Gable wins the U.S. Open, he goes right to Final X as the man. Everybody else that qualifies through all these other ways, national champion, top 6 or 7 at the U.S. Open, previous Bill Farrell, things like that, they go to a mini tournament. The winner of that will then go wrestle Gable at the Final X.
You're correct. And to put some specificity on that, it'd be Nick Gwizdowski, Hayden Zilmer, Tony Cassiope, Demetrius Thomas, the Pan Am thing, the top 7, and then Mason Paris.
Yes.
So you understand it correctly.
I do
And
now. Yeah.
It's a little complicated. I think maybe my brain just wanted it to be the other way because it was way simpler. So, GT, you've been around this a long time. I'm not sure if Nike has a seat at the table on input or maybe input but not deciding. Like, I know, speaking to some folks, that they wanted to reduce the number of steps because they wanted each tournament to be more meaningful. You don't need to make Final X meaningful. It's as meaningful as it can be. And the World Team Trial Tournament was fairly meaningful because that's how you got there if there wasn't somebody sitting. But I do think this process has made the US Open way more meaningful in over half of the weights. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack on the processes that we previously had. I mean, we could go all the way back to having 3 Final X locations, and then, not having Greco be a part of that process and then Greco then being a part of the process. I mean, I feel like this is a very clean and concise way for you to get to represent Team USA. It does benefit the reigning world medalists quite a bit. Once again, as probably they should be, not having to go through like a 3-team or a 3-tournament trial process gets to be very cumbersome. But I feel like if it's not like what we're discussing here at 61 and heavyweight, there is nobody that was the reigning medalist. So yes, whoever wins the US Open goes to Final X. Then there's a mini tournament to determine the second person. And once again, you got to qualify for that tournament. That's totally fine. So it's basically a two or 3 trial or tournament trial process. So if you go to Bill Farrell, NCAAs, or whatever it may be, you're only wrestling really 3 tournaments in order to make the U.S. World Team. It does put a lot more emphasis on the U.S. Open, which the U.S. Open historically has been that piece. And once again, getting back to that, I think is a very good thing for a lot of the guys, because they put it on their calendar and it's always this time of the year and you're ready to rock and roll and you have your peaking process at that point in time. So, I feel like the U.S. Open is one of the more prestigious, I would say, tournaments that the USA Wrestling platform has in the trials process. I mean, always a World Team Trials or an Olympic Trials is always a very, very big market and a very big piece. But I feel like the U.S. Open is kind of like our Masters or the U.S. Open in general, like where anybody can enter and you can kind of go through that whole thing. So I like it. I like how this is kind of shaping up. I like how it's structured for us to select our world team. But yes, it does favor those reigning world medalists a little bit heavier, but you still have to go and then have the showcase, which is Final X. And Final X is, I think, something that is very, very much a showcase for our process. Like, hey, these are the 2 best guys. It narrows your focus rather than, once again, we're wrestling nerds, so that's okay. But, going 16 guys deep, knowing all their backstories, knowing like, hey, this guy could maybe go here, this guy could go here. Seeding really matters. Yeah. Hey, it's 1v2. It's just, that's it. So this is the guy that was the reigning medalist, or this was the guy that won the US Open. He's sitting at number 1. It makes it probably a little bit easier for conversation. It's like, hey, potentially, once again, not saying anything against anybody else, but it's like, okay, well, like JB's sitting out. Well, then who's going to wrestle Jordan?
Perfect example I was thinking of. Yes. Okay.
Well, then, Dake's sitting out. That weight class is tremendously difficult. 74 kilos in the U.S. is a juggernaut of a weight class.
Right.
97, juggernaut of a weight class. I mean, once again, USA Wrestling is doing very well right now. So having that much of a field, then it narrows your focus to the final 2 guys in the U.S. Crazy. But I do like the process that it's been simplified.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically a 2-step process or a 3-step process. It depends on if somebody's already sitting in Final X. Like if somebody's sitting in Final X, it's US Open, Final X. If they're not, there's the World Team Trial mini tournament, or I don't think they wouldn't call it mini tournament, challenge tournament. So Gary, I apologize for putting mini tournament into the zeitgeist, the challenge tournament. I do think that you sort of said this offhandedly, Grant, but I think this is a real thing when they were getting input from coaches. Travel, peaking, and cost are all things that have been improved now. There's less things to go to. Okay. You don't have to peak as many times. And then obviously that's less expensive if you're not doing those things. So, for example, if a Dayton Fix doesn't want to wrestle, he doesn't have to. And at the U.S. Open, he can, and he'll be seated. He'd probably right now, well, if he went to the U.S. Open, he'd be the 2 seed behind Gross. So, like maybe something crazy happens, but it's also difficult to envision a scenario where somebody could come in and have one monster tournament and be above him. I guess the most realistic way that would be is if somebody from the outside won the tournament and they're sitting in Final X and they go to the challenge tournament, then essentially Gross would be the 1 and Dayton would be the 2 most likely, but they're actually the 2 and the 3. 1 is already out there. So just some things to think about. The other things, as I was digging up stuff to sort of have background or data for this podcast, pulled up the criteria to qualify for a 2024 Olympic redshirt year. This is straight off USA Wrestling with their letterhead. 6 ways to qualify. Only required to meet 1. Past national team member. Top 3 from the senior world team trials or Olympic team trial. Top 8 the April 2023 Senior U.S. Open. Top 8 at the December 2023 Senior U.S. Nationals. So this is the tournament that we watched Spencer Lee wrestle in back in 2019 down in Dallas, where he killed everybody. And where we call it the U.S. Open. It's actually the U.S. Nationals, but that's because there is no U.S. Open in an Olympic year, because that's the Olympic trials. Top 3 at the 2023 NCAA Division I Wrestling Championship. So this is now like the Andrew Alirez's of the world, those kind of folks. I mean, there's a gazillion other guys, okay? NCAA champion from a previous year, and in capital letters, and top 2 from the 2023 U23 Nationals. And it also says, additionally, must accomplish both in case the and is not capitalized enough. And the last one is previous U17, U20, or U23 world medalist, UWW. So that's a really good segue. That applies to a guy like Luke Lillidow. So he was a world age group world medalist. He would now, theoretically, in 2020, if he was in college, could sit out next year. And it doesn't count. There's a whole bunch of things on the other side of that college thing, too. Like you can't actually be enrolled in school. You're not supposed to practice with the college team. You're only supposed to practice with the RTC guys. So there's a bunch of things to walk through with that. So we have probably 2 more podcasts before the U.S. Open. Well, 1 more before the U.S. Open and 1 like sort of during the U.S. Open. And Mark, maybe we'll do that podcast like on Tuesday or Wednesday of that week so we can get everything out, because that's just going to be full-blown, men's, women, Greco. And we'll go through all the lists. Flo, if you guys are looking, Flo is every day updating the list of entries, men's, women, Greco, and all the age group stuff. So they're doing a fantastic job there. Big shout out to Luke Lillidow. He's from St. Charles, St. Louis. His dad and I grew up together. He was at CBC, got a chance to work with him. Awesome young man, committed to Penn State. That 2024 recruiting class for them is looking bonkers right now. So definitely wanted to give a shout out to him. So where do you guys want to go next? You want to talk about 2024 returning team points?
Sure.
Okay, let me share this. So this is again from Earl, who put this up here, and I just copied and pasted it into our document. So no credit for this. This was him. Let me find it where I can see it. So This is different, just so you guys understand, and anybody watching or listening. This is returning points are different than returning placing points. And what I mean by that is take Carter Starachi. A first place guy coming back is worth 20 points. He had scored 24. So this chart shows them bringing back 24 points. So it includes bonus. Penn State brings back 114. They lost 23 and a half. Mizzou, as of right now, is at 61. They only lost 3.5, which I think were JQ and Hart. Cornell, 54 and a half. They lose 22. That's, I think, Yanni. Iowa, 48. They lose 34 and a half. That's Spencer and Warner and Max Murin, I believe. You guys in Iowa can correct me if I'm wrong on that. NC State is also at 48, and they bring everybody back. Virginia Tech's 47. They only lost 2 points. Ohio State is 7th at 42. They lost 28 and a half. And on down the line, you can see here, those are the columns on the left. The chart on the right shows it by weight. So what you really want is as few weight classes as possible, scoring you the most possible points. Because, like, for example, if you have 40 points, it's probably better to have 220 than it is to have 10 fours. Because if you have 220s, you have 8 spots where you can get a lot better, where 10 fours, you're going to have to, there's probably less marginal improvement. So, Mark, this is the kind of stuff you and I would have normally put together. What are your thoughts when you look at this?
Well, I think, the transfer portal, David's going to really make a difference in some of these, because that's going to obviously take points away from other colleges that they had this year. So if you want to really dive in deep to this, see who's in the transfer portal, who may be leaving. Some of the guys will probably not leave their school and stay there anyway, but that makes it even more interesting. For example, 133-pound from Minnesota, Nagao is going, he's in the transfer portal. He's, where is his points going to go? What school is that going to go to? And that's huge when it comes to figuring out, what it's going to, the background of next year for some of these teams. So it's fun to see. I like looking at it, trying to play with it a little bit, who they got coming in, who's been in the room, who redshirted, who's going to transfer in, what freshmen are coming up that we think could possibly make the podium. That's what it's all about, just having fun with it and trying to figure it out. Who's going to move up a weight, and that's going to affect their team points from last year because it's at a completely different weight. So, yeah.
It doesn't take into account incoming freshmen.
Nope.
And it doesn't even take into account medalists from previous years. So like a Stephen Buchanan is not on here anywhere. If an AJ
Correct.
Ferrari ends up somewhere, his points are not clear. They're only points from the 2023 tournament. So GT, you're at Grandview. You guys have, been first and then 1 year second, like the last 12, 13 years. You would know the count better than me. But so this is, I'm sure, an exercise you guys sort of do, at least for yourself. Like, okay, we had these 12 guys, and correct me if I'm wrong, you had 12 qualifiers, 11 medalists, and then, you lose X number of them. And so you lose X amount of points, you bring back Y amount of points. And so, and looking at this to a different lens as a guy who's still in the coaching world, how do you view it?
Well, I think the biggest thing that probably a lot of the schools, they'll look at the points and know like where they're at and whatever it is. But I think also just as an exercise, especially probably more so at the Division I level, is who's going to be the guy at each weight, because you have to send them to the conference tournament in order to qualify and have basically the year to be able to do the RPI and get all that stuff figured out, right? So let's say, for instance, I'm Penn State University, and 125 is a weight class that I don't have any points returning. I didn't send a guy to the NCAA wrestling tournament at that weight. Who's going to be my guy there that can score me points or develop or recruit or portal or whatever it is? So I think it's an exercise of just all of the things combined based off specificity and needs. So once again, I think if we could go through all of these type of situations with each team, the returning points that Penn State has is double everybody else.
Yeah.
Now, once again, does that guarantee them those points at the next national tournament? Maybe, maybe not. Very, very big runs by, like Shane Van Ness and Levi Haynes that were youngins when it came to their eligibility status. And then also outdoing kind of like their seeds, especially Van Ness. But you also have certified hitters in, Kirkfleet, Starachi, and Brooks, and Bo Bartlett that did very, very, very well. But you got to look at the specific needs of each team. And I think that's where the portal and then your incoming freshmen take a very, very – they increase your picture. So, like, I know that there's a lot of young, talented kids that will be coming into the fold next year as freshmen. Do they qualify? One, how many points do you think they would be able to get at the national tournament? And how do they rank nationally on like building for the future, or can we win the title next year?
Yeah, I think everything you're saying is dead on the nuts. So I'm kind of looking at this chart on the left, and just to give you some examples. If Nagao leaves, I think he scored 15.5. So that takes Minnesota from 27.5 returning points to 12. So they would go way down the chart. Northern Colorado, 27 points. I don't know why there's a -1 here, but I don't remember how many points Alira scored in terms of bonus, but he scored at least 20. So they would drop to 7. Nebraska is going to add Ridge Lovett back. He scored at least 16 the year before. So that would tie them with Ohio State, all else being equal, which is a big sentence, at 42. Wherever a Bernie Truax goes, he's going to add a minimum of 12.5 points. So if you place him on a certain team, boom. Then the other thing is, like, if you look at rankings, and I scroll down a little bit, like Arizona State's got 25. Richie Figueroa is going to be ranked in the top 6. I mean, he actually beat the guy that is the returning number 1 in a college meet. I didn't wrestle the whole season, but I mean, he's going to be ranked fairly high. So, if they have, when they plug him in, let's say he's worth 10 points, now they're in the top 9. And then if you say, okay, like any of these guys transferred to a school like that and 10 more points, all of a sudden they're at 50. If you look
they
at
also get their 57-pounder back too, who was ranked third, David?
Teamer back, yes. So if you just add Figs and Teamer, and they're each worth, say, 10 to 12, that puts them right in that same tier with Iowa and NC State.
Yep.
So, and Virginia Tech, like they're all 1 point apart or tied. So
yeah.
When will we know kind of, I mean, once again, not to jump into the conversation, but I think at some point in time, probably closer to maybe like the August time period, where like we know the red-shirted people that will be kind of ready to go, or the heavy hitters from maybe rankings that have done in the past, where they might be able to find their way into a lineup after all of the portal stuff happens. So let's say, for instance, Nagao goes at 33 to Iowa or Penn State or Cornell. Whoever it was that was a major talented red-shirted kid that would be behind them, like maybe we could play that game a little bit more.
Yeah, there's a kid out of Texas, and I can't think of his name, but he's a huge recruit down there too. I watched him beat Josh Saunders. The thing about Nagao, which is interesting, is if he goes to Cornell, it doesn't actually help them on paper because they got 22 points back with Vito. What it does allow them to do is if Vito wants to Olympic redshirt, then he can. And instead of them losing 22 points, they only lose net like 7 points, 6.5 points. For a Penn State, for an Iowa, it's a huge jump. Penn State jumps from 0 to say 15.5. Iowa jumps from 0.5 to 15.5. The 4 schools he said were Penn State, Iowa, Cornell, and Minnesota. So, I mean, I think we've sort of addressed all that. I do know, talking to a couple D1 coaches, that like I think Truax is going to make his decision by the end of the month. I think Izzy Olenek's going to make his decision in the next 10 days. So some of those guys, that's going to happen. Another thing to talk about is the Oklahoma University job. So Rob Cole was in Oklahoma, I don't know. It sounded, from everything I've talked to, and I think you guys know I have a fairly high number of friends in Oklahoma, that he was offered the job and didn't take it. And that's not confirmed. That's just conjecture from people that I spoke to. So this is just the opinion of David Mirikitani and not of USA Wrestling. So he's back at Stanford. And then depending on who gets that job, maybe Buchanan goes in the portal again. And then there's also this 4-4-4 rule. If you go to a 4-year, a 4-year, and a 4-year, you cannot transfer to the third 4-year without losing a year of eligibility. You can't just redshirt your way out of it. You lose a year unless you've graduated in there. So I don't have any idea what Buchanan's academic status is. I don't have any idea if he loves OU or if he went because of Tion. But those are all things to think about in A, that hiring, and B, how that affects the landscape. I do think there's a really sort of obvious point here, but maybe it just makes sense to say out loud. Like if you take a team, like let's say take Virginia Tech, because they're not mentioned in some of these things. Like if they added Bernie Truax and they added like another big time transfer, like say they added Stephen Buchanan, they would be projected to score about 75 points, which would put them second. So the portal is like this super quick way to get good quick. Shane Griffith may be in the portal. With the cool thing about this chart, and if anybody wants a copy of it, happy to send it to you. You can look and go, okay, who needs a 165 pounder? So if you go to this, like, oh, well, the team that scored the least amount of points at that way are Penn State. Okay, but Facundo's really good. Cornell, Julian Ramirez is really good. You go through this, like Patrick Kennedy is really good, but didn't score. Patty Gallagher. I mean, you kind of go through the line, but there's some other teams you're like, well, like he's not going to transfer to Iowa State where David Carr is. He's not going to transfer to Missouri where Keegan O'Toole is. He's not going to transfer to Michigan where Cam Amin is, unless like a David Carr, Keegan O'Toole were to take an Olympic redshirt year, so that's why all this stuff is interwoven. And that's why we talk about this in the order that we do. So many things are going to change and it affects the team race. Like Northern Colorado did a great job getting themselves on the map this year. But in GT, you know this as good as anybody. Andrew Lears is arguably better at freestyle than he is at folk style. Like he's a legit top 8 dude to make the Olympic team, I think. Is that a fair sentence?
Yeah, I mean, that weight class is absolutely stacked, but he's proven to be a very, very talented and capable freestyle wrestler and with good quality wins.
Right. Like I'm not saying he's like would Tech Yanni 10-0 or his favorite to. I'm saying he's in the top 8 tier. Okay, so it's not a pipe dream for him to think he could make the Olympic team. Plus, who are we to say whether it's a pipe dream or not? He meets the criteria, which I just read off. So which way he goes has a huge impact on where Northern Colorado sits in the preseason rankings. There's an upside and a downside. If he sits, you go, okay, they're not going to score as many points. The upside is he did win it. Troy Nickerson was wearing a suit on Saturday night. That's got to help recruiting. And you kind of have him there for an extra year as an influence on those guys. So that door kind of swings both ways. So, something else to think about that matters. So a couple of other points. So we talked about the portal. Slavikowski has committed to Rutgers. I mean, the people that are sort of still in the portal out there, Jordan Decatur, Nagao, Chris Cannon, Mitchell Messenbrink, DiAugustino. I've sort of looked at this portal thing differently. than I used to. I think in a lot of cases, these guys already knew where they were going. These deals were already being made. I can tell you for a fact that at the Nationals in 2022 in Detroit, I talked to a coach on the floor on Saturday morning that said 3 of their guys have been contacted already about transferring, and the tournament wasn't over yet. And I don't know that this is longer than a 12-minute conversation, but I think people need to figure out. I'm a capitalist, so I love the portal in the sense that, like, if I signed a scholarship with Mark's school and I got 20%, and then I outperformed that, like I went and won nationals as a freshman, I probably shouldn't be on 20%. But all Mark is obligated to pay me is 20%. It's a year-to-year contract, but he's not obligated to bump me. I can just tell him I'm going in the portal and get more money. And I'm a really good bet because I'm a good student and I won nationals in this scenario. On the other hand, if you don't have a ton of money, extra money, NIL money, more than the 9.9, you develop guys and they're leaving. The rich are getting richer. The rich are just playing the game. You cannot blame the teams with the money. They're getting paid to win, and they got the money to use it, and that's what those people that donated money want them to do. You know, the people like, you know, Grant Turner wants me to advertise for, you know, Des Moines Bar and Grill, and he's willing to pay me to do it. That's what should happen. But I've thought about this, and Mark, you always say this to me, you know, you love the phrase, don't point out a problem unless you have a potential solution. I think they should consider being able to offer kids longer-term contracts. Like, and there's a bunch to unpack there. I'm not saying it's without flaws, or that there's an automatic step up. That if you go, okay, like if I recruited you at 20%. Mark recruited me at 20%. He thought I'd be a practice room guy. 20% is like a practice room guy, I would say. 10 to 30%, depending on which program you're at. If you start, it goes to 30. You qualify, it goes to 40. You All-American, like yours. I mean, it could just be literally a 6, 7, 8, you know, on up to 100%. And then you get that. I mean, and then it's like a baseball contract where if you don't ever win again, you're locked in. You've sort of stepped up. There's flaws in that, right? Like then if I become a pothead but I stayed on the team and I show up on practice on time, or I fall in love with my girlfriend and don't want to go to, you know, really want to train hard anymore. It's a flawed system. And it's super interesting. I mean, like Grandview has a great team. They don't have 80 guys on full rides. That school's got to make money. You know, so like that's how that works. NAI's on a different system, but they all have to meet their bring number basically as a collective unit. So I always say this and it never happens. Maybe if there's a dead week, we can talk more about this. Stuff just keeps coming up. Like I know the next 3 pods are going to be pre-US Open, post-US Open. Then it's going to be pre-World Team Trials. Then it's going to be pre-Final X. So, and then there's going to be portal stuff and coaching carousel stuff because OU is going to fill that position in the next 2 weeks as well. You know, and so when that happens, someone's leaving a job, and then round and round we go. So I don't have much else for you guys this week. I mean, and it's okay. We don't always have to go an hour. Anything else you guys want to cover before we boogie out?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you're talking about, you know, the portal, David, and these guys getting deals. And, you know, I think people kind of forget that you have a guy there. You have a guy at that weight in your room that's been working his butt off. So he didn't place as high as maybe you had hoped at nationals, but every day he's in that room trying to get better. It's kind of hard when you think of loyalty and they call it a team atmosphere. We're a family. Well, it's like bringing in somebody from another family and inserting them in your family, and then you're kind of pushing one of your family members out. It's kind of, you know, and I understand they're paid to win. I do understand that, but it's still, it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. And I know every situation is different. You're forcing them to improve and things like that. But I kind of miss the old loyalty thing, David, where you're not getting recruited. Once you go to a school, that's where you're at. And I like.
Go ahead.
No, I'm
No,
not.
I respectfully disagree in the sense that you're always recruiting. Everybody's always recruiting. So like Mizzou is not recruiting over the top of Keegan O'Toole, but Mizzou is recruiting the next Keegan O'Toole at that weight class. Okay. And they got somebody there who isn't starting right now. They're like, hey man, wait your turn. And you're going to train with literally one of the best guys in the world. So I think the portal is just a different version of recruiting. You're just getting a more known entity. Like, okay, let's use Grant as an example. We wanted to add somebody who lives in the international wrestling, freestyle Greco women's field. Okay? We're USA Wrestling in the sense of this podcast. I could have said to Gary Abbott, put out a blast, apply for this spot. I mean, we could have done that. We'd have got somebody really good, I'm sure. We got the best, but we could have got somebody really good. Okay. And I privately had conversations with each of you guys like, listen, we're all going to get a little less airtime. Is that okay? Because Mark, you're my guy. You're my ride or die. So if you'd been bothered, I'm like, okay, we'll figure it out. You were very gracious about it. Grant has been awesome. He was very gracious. Kind of just let us go to him till he would, like when we were ready. Very unselfishly took a back seat till, we got a rhythm. Which is I feel like we have one now, but I think you guys could run this podcast without me for a couple episodes. It'd be fine. But we're going to always try to be better. I mean, and it doesn't matter if you're Grandview or if you're the team that took 35th at NAI. In fact, those guys are probably recruiting more over the top of guys than Grandview are. They got a lot of good guys. Go ahead, GT.
This is kind of it's a kind of an unprecedented situation with NIL and the portal that is we have to make sure that it's just not a transfer portal. There is NIL capabilities of transferring. Right. So there is a couple of other slivers of decision-making that occur. Now, once again, we all have been coaches. Our job is to win a national title. If I feel like I have somebody in the room that can fit the bill, okay, then I stick with my guy and I don't necessarily go to the portal. But if I have even an inkling that maybe I could get better at that weight class and push maybe those guys to achieve more and be at the same weight and now once again, I'm speaking from an NAI perspective most of the time. Hey, maybe they could go meet in the national finals. Okay, that's cool. But if we go to the NCAA Division I tournament, I got to send one guy to the conference tournament. So raising the level of your room is I think all we would agree. We want to have the very best athletes capable representing our brand. But there is part of that, Mark calls it loyalty, but there is a part of your in-house products of developing those athletes. And once again, if you have somebody in-house that you feel really good about, say Keegan O'Toole, Olympic red shirts, and we already have somebody behind him, I already got a guy. I don't need to go out and get somebody else. I got a guy that I feel very good about that's going to step up and be the man. I think where the issues that occur with the portal and or NIL, in my opinion, is where we're talking about the rich getting richer and the poor staying poor, is where somebody and I'll use Coach Nickerson as a great example because I like him a lot and I respect him as a coach. Absolutely. Is that if Alirez goes and wins a national title and all of a sudden then leaves the program because he's I want to go do something else. Okay. But it's a tough situation to occur for that program where you lose your very best guy and then he goes to Penn State and then wins a title there. I think that's a tougher scenario as far as a loyalty thing, because you've already got him to the top of the mountain and then all of a sudden now he wants to go off and do something differently. there's always different scenarios for everybody to enter the transfer portal. Could be academic, could be grad school, could be NIL, could be that they just offered you more money. Maybe you're unhappy there, whatever it is, girlfriend,
assistant
family.
coach leaves, assistant, yeah.
All of the different reasons that occur for transferring, it's not just about one piece of the puzzle, in my opinion. Knowing kids and college kids, it could be a litany of different aspects that makes somebody go somewhere else. But I think because of the transfer portal and what has happened in collegiate athletics, that loyalty to a program and or a coaching staff or whatever it may be, I think has gone away tremendously, because the athlete is a little bit more, it's more about the athlete in this type of collegiate scenario. And I'm talking about all collegiate athletics, not just specifically wrestling.
Athletes are more empowered now, right? I mean, like, that goes without saying. Like, now they got some stroke, they got some leverage. And, we've seen this in other sports, like a kid committed to Florida, supposedly had a $13 million NIL deal, and it fell through. So he gets out, and he should be able to get out. I think before, like, if you didn't like your coach, or if your coach signed you and then got somebody better, you were stuck there. And I understand the concept. Well, like, listen, if you want to be the best in the country, you're going to have to beat this guy anyway. Like, okay. But, like, look at Matt Ramos. Matt Ramos is a great example. He wasn't going to start over McKee. I don't know why. I don't know if he couldn't beat him head to head. I don't know. Maybe they wanted to start the kid that was from Minnesota. I have no idea. I love the guys in Minnesota. They've been nothing but nice to me, and highly, highly integrity-laden program. But they had two guys that were good enough to place at nationals. Matt Ramos almost placed at 133. He was Mark's pick. He just recorded one of the 5, and I'm not sure there's 4 more, but one of the 5 biggest upsets in the history of collegiate wrestling. That moment never happens if he doesn't go in the portal. So I'm not against it. And the other thing that's, like, really tricky about this is, like, we use this phrase all the time, grow wrestling. We're all trying to grow wrestling. Well, there's 2 ways to grow wrestling. At least there's multiple ways. There's 100 ways. But 2 ways that are sort of diametrically opposed here. One is, okay, like, take the University of Iowa. Got to be one of the 5, I don't think be disrespectful, 5 best places in the country to wrestle in terms of fan support. Okay? Like, just fan support. Like, I mean, I get to go there once a year. I mean, people are crazy in the most positive way possible about Iowa wrestling. Okay, it's not an insult. That's a compliment. Okay? But conversely, if you take look at Old Dominion. They got picked apart. That team got cut. The other way to grow wrestling is to add more programs. And if you're a college president and you understand how this portal thing works, and they go, listen, we can start a program. We can come up with enough money for a coaching staff and a travel budget and a gear budget. We'll call Nike, do all these things. And we'll get you 9.9. But we don't have $1 million NIL pot. We don't even have a $200,000 NIL pot. So tell me, Coach Mirikitani, Coach Turner, Coach Ostrander, what's going to happen when you get good? How are you going to keep these guys? Everything we say is nuked by, listen, if somebody comes and offers them $250,000, we can't match it. So, and I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying it's something to discuss, because like we said, there's multiple ways to grow wrestling. Like, I'm an events guy. I like to put on events, trying to do things to make things really opportunities, exposure, fundraising, stuff like that. Those are sort of non-arguable that they're good for wrestling. They're not like the greatest things ever, but we're trying. But if it's a zero-sum world, if I take a guy from Grant's team and he comes to my, if I'm Purdue and Matt Ramos comes over, you could argue that's good for wrestling. Purdue, they had their first All-Americans in like 10 or 11 years. GT, you knew that number. We talked off air. Purdue's, I cannot imagine that this did not have a huge economic impact on Purdue and on the wrestling team and on the school in general. Because like that stuff was like on ESPN. Like that was not just on Flow. Like it was out there. But conversely, Minnesota scored way less points at 125 this year because McKee didn't make his normal run to the backside. So it's just something, I'm sure we'll discuss it more. I mean, wrestling is really healthy at the non-Division I levels. Are growing like crazy. They're really healthy at the USA wrestling level, age group and stuff like that. And I will say this again, go to the US Open. GT and I think, would wholeheartedly agree on that. It is one of the coolest tournaments you can go to. I think there's like 30 mats going, GT, between, like the 8 on the main floor, the 4 or 5 on the top strip, and then there's like 20 in that other gym, but they're all within like 100 yards of walking of each other. For like, you pick any spot. It's unbelievable. And the seating is not like, you want to sit on the front row, you can. There's not that many people there. It is awesome. There's a million hotels in Las Vegas. Bars and restaurants are open late at night there. I don't know if you guys knew that, but Vegas stays open late. So something to contemplate. You can get steak and eggs at 2 a.m. So, okay, last thing for me, I want to give a shout out to 2 buddies of mine. I'm going to the UFC. I'm leaving here in about an hour for UFC in Kansas City. Zach Cummings is fighting. He wrestled for me. This is his farewell fight. So probably one of the 5 guys I've coached that got more out of his talent than anybody else. Not a super athletic dude and has had a long career in MMA, has coached a ton of great guys, has started his own gym, super positive influence on a ton of people, super proud of him. Want to thank Scott Cutbirth for helping us get tickets to the event. Super excited about that. He is the girls director for the state of Missouri. USA Wrestling does an awesome job. And Matt Gilbert from Resolite is flying in. He's never been to a live MMA event. He's been a great sponsor to us at the Border Brawl, so super excited to get together with him. And we're going to have some good Kansas City barbecue, which I know GT partook of last weekend for his annual Masters trip. So this is a great conversation about a lot of different subject, guys. Enjoy it as always. Thank everybody for watching and listening, and we'll speak to you all next week.